I would like to thank everyone on behalf of the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory of the University of Belgrade for being here today so that we could follow the construction of this conference envisaged by Noah Dreister and dedicated to testimony to poetry and language. Thanks above all to Noah's great love for Paul Celan, which I share with her. This day is completely dedicated to his poetry, his thought, and the thematization of witness and testimony. Also, I would like to thank all the experts and witnesses of Celan's poetry who are here today. Firstly, Bertrand Badiou, whose presence is a particular honor. Some of his suggestions have been very helpful to me today, and I wish to say that I did not hesitate long to write a few words about Paul Celan. One of the reasons is certainly the incredible precision of reading offered by Jacques Derrida in one of his last seminars, The Meridian, which I attended. It is, however, rather difficult after you, of course, after Badiou and indeed Jean-Pierre Lefebvre, who unfortunately could not be with us today, and not only them, to write seriously about Celan and to follow his intentions. Still, before I explain this title and subtitle, I would like to immediately determine Celan's particularity of phrase and characteristic of testimony. To what does Celan testify? Does he testify at all? And can he at all be a witness? How can we describe his activity and effort to construct a position from which he could potentially testify, that is, be a credible witness? That is the principle. If you are a witness, you have to be credible. Allow me to hastily and preliminarily define Paul Celan's engagement, his poetry, thematization of his poetry in fragments, diaries, published speeches, as an attempt to deconstruct the protocol of testimony and the position of the witness. That is to say, the poet as a witness and poem as a testimony. Although there are difficulties and often rather unclear testimony, I would be interested to reveal the epistemological value of Celan's testimony, and perhaps his original contribution to reconstruction of the concept or practice of testimony. What is it that Celan lets us know? What do we learn when Celan speaks or writes? What makes Celan's insistence on the reconstruction of the position of witness or testimony different from well-known stereotypes we associate with these protocols of witness or testimony? I would like to delve into Celan's position, use various tentative dartling probes in order to list some of the essential characteristics or forms of testimony. A first option would refer to the narrativity of testimony. Testimony, if it is testimony, is some kind of, transfer of information. This is information. A given content is transferred from one place to another. This is the engagement of witness, to transfer something from one place to another, and it should be believed or not believed. When I speak of epistemological status of someone's testimony, what I have in mind is that testimony implies the possibility of becoming meaning or becoming knowledge, or provided it is true, that is grounded performatively and therefore accepted by others in a social setting or group. I'm ignoring here the cases of testimony in which the witness is guilty. and shown up because he is a witness and because he is, for example, he is a survivor. If he has carried over knowledge, his function is completed. Paul Celan often neglects the narrative potential of his expressions, as we often do not know what he is speaking of, for the sake of the importance of his own presence, or a present act, or un acte présent, a present act, or even, or in English, immediate act, maybe, or even presence of act without actor. For example, poem without poem, act of poem writing without the poem itself. I'm referring here on Derrida's important quotation I will cite in English: the essence of testimony does not necessarily reduce to narration, that is to say, to descriptive or informative reporting, to knowledge or to account. It is first of all a present act, or un acte présent. The martyr or martyr, when he testifies, does not recount a story. He offers himself. Il s'offre. And this is very close to one similar, the context of Emmanuel Levinas when he speaks on pure testimony, le témoignage pur. What is the témoignage, or what is the pure testimony? This is testimony does not thematize that to which it witnesses. This is pure testimony. Well, second, Celan is never third, I think. He's never testis, or he's never terstis. Why? Because he's ever on the move, on the road, in motion and in retreat, and thus does not occupy the position of one who is present and who sees. One cannot help but think of the Serbian word očevidac, literally one who sees directly with one's eyes, nor indeed of the English eyewitness, which might be different from simply witness. This is witness. Witness has eyes. In etymology of this testis, etymologically, I'm trying to, this is translation of Benveniste, etymologically testis, and the one who assists as third, terstis, where there are two interested parties. This is testis. Well, and testis in the same time must be present. That means the testis, I quote Benveniste, the testis is present to sight and knowledge of the parties. In French, le testis est là au vu et au su des parties. The testis is present to sight and knowledge of the parties. In the 90s wars in the Balkans, which this conference is constantly evoking, we have, I remember this example where a man, and at the same time husband, and at the same time the son, we can say soldier, clandestinely watches the rape of his own wife and mother, vicious murders of one's own children by criminals, and later gives testimony regarding this. In that, if we understand this difference clearly of Benveniste, that there exists witness who is present, this kind of testimony should not be considered credible because he is not seen. Well, difference between testis and arbiter. Arbiter is one who does not occupy the position. That means who is not Arbiter has testimonial function, but he's without having seen. That means he's seeing, but without having seen. Even when Celan is imagining a completely new association of those exiled from their native countries. This is imagination of Celans, der Verband der Heimat Vertriebenen, or an association of global exile still remains to be founded. This is Celan's citation, the quotation. To unify all exiled from their native countries. Celan does not assume either collective or individual testimony, but paradoxically a new silent pseudo-homeland. And I quote this fragment. Celan, in their thoughts of who and what they are and how they are exiled, there is their homeland. Im Gedanken, das und was und wie sie vertrieben wurden, ist die eigentliche Heimat. This Bertrand Badiou has pointed out to me, perhaps unconsciously, the slight shifts in versions of this sentence mentioned several times in Celan's fragments. He mentioned in 3 times in Mikroliten and 2 times, I think, in Meridian, but always with small differences. Wäre noch, wohl noch, ja wohl erst, etc., etc. This is maybe very important. That means it is impossible to testify about one's homeland. Third, Celan never testifies about himself, nor is his own witness. That means I'm thinking here of the paradigmatic model founded in the Gospel, for example, according to John, where Jesus Christ is always testimony in his own name. There is Celan is not his own guarantor. Or why? Because his own quasi-I or quasi-me, which always appears in the search for its homeland or in the return to the homeland, is always transformed, or a plurality of various I, or else a lost, imaginary lost. That means we have not fixed identity, or I, or me, or ich in Celan. For example, the poet's homeland as well as his identity changes from poem to poem. It's impossible to be, there is no, this is not witness register. Or for example, in a letter from the 60s to his friend in Bucharest, Celan wonders if it would not have been better to have stayed in his native land. Well, plurality of I and imaginary I, in that sense, paradoxically, the status of one who is not at all able to testify convincingly fulfills the famous rule of which speaks Pascal. We can find one crazy sentence in Blaise Pascal, this is La Fuma 822, in where he said, I only believe stories of witnesses whose throats have been slit. Je ne crois que les histoires dont les témoins se feraient égorger. There are no witness, no narrative, but there is hesitation and detour. This is why. That means we have not exactly narratives with Celans, we have not the person. Author is égorgé, because of his hesitation and detour. In the following sentence, this is in the title in Celan's Meridian, Ort meine Herkunft, the place of my origin, which I have used as the title. You know very well, better than me, that a lot is said. But to this syntagma, Ort meine Herkunft, I add a question by Celan that could disturb many of us here today, and not only here, and not only today, of course. His answer to, we can say, to this, or his addition to this syntagma, and that's it. Heimat und ich, or I don't know how to say, my origin and me. Is it ich, me, or I? This is first problem. Okay, for this is on the book de Jean Emery, Jenseits von Schuld und Sühne. Celan notes: Heimat und ich. Ich war nicht einmal zu Hause, als ich daheim zu Hause war. In Bertrand's translation, pays natal et moi, je n'étais même pas à la maison quand j'étais chez moi. Or in English, I was not at my home when I was at my house, or when I was at my home. We have a problem with this daheim and zu Hause. I was not at my home when I was at the same time at my house. Well, we have here Celan reading Amery's essay. Wie viel Heimat braucht der Mensch? This is the question in this book, and encounters the sentence of Amery, brilliant sentence: Ich war kein Ich mehr und lebte nicht in einem Wir. I was not I anymore. I was not I anymore, and I'm living, and I'm not dwelling in one wir. Any conversation or mention of Herkunft, that means being at home, or at one's place, or being home, any mention of native land or homeland necessarily poses and makes resurface this question, our own and about ourselves. Homeland and me, and homeland and I, or what is my case with this word homeland? The emphasis is certainly on the comma and break after the word Heimat. A question or narrative, everything usually begins in narration of Heimat, immediately possess the question of I or me, of birth certificate and passport, of memories and time, distant places, etc. The word identity, always very complicated and difficult word, and sometimes already unnecessary and trivial word, which usually harmonizes all these operations and which usually begins with the pronoun I and question I, implies two more protocols on which Paul Celan insists. Well, a potential third protocol, I will say immediately what is those two, but potential third will be the one mentioned by Amery in the second part of the sentence Ich war kein Ich mehr und lebte nicht in einem Wir. This second part, und lebte nicht in einem Wir, where Heimat implies the existence of something more intimate, that community as such. That means the existence of Wir, and the belonging to that Wir. Such a Wir is a fictitious first entity that implies any future thematization of Heimat or loss of Heimat. Namely, Heimat as entirely different for all members of the community becomes the completely specific integrative factor for all of us, making us closer and more equal as members of the community. Who has no Heimat, he is not part of the community. We are connected if and only if each belongs to their own native land. That is to say, everyone is at home. For the condition that we are all together is satisfied if each of us in his own place, in his real place, and belongs to their original wir or we. One without a native land, paradoxically, is not part of the community or not part of us at all. One without their wir does not exist or will soon cease to exist. This is implication. Well, who has not homeland? Well, it's a process disappearing. The first protocol of this interpretation, homeland and me, refers to feelings and often comes in the form of insecurity, disquiet. It is unseemly for someone to ask me or even to ask myself whether I am and where I am at home, even though I myself am always asking myself that. Celan's answer is homeland and me. I was not even at home when I was at home or at the house. That will be first, feeling. And the second refers to the returning, the road, dilly-dallying, the way we return and how we travel back. As you know, I will refer immediately to speech in Bremen and in Darmstadt. This is returning, the road, the way we return and how we travel back. Returning, as you remember, the Heimkehr, this poem is from 55 or 56. For example, this poem is translated into Russian as Возвращение на родину, to homeland. Heimkehr to Heimat, yeah, always. Returning can often be connected to vertigo, to nausea, and to vomiting. In Serbian, the words vraćanje, returning, and povraćanje, vomiting, are a good indication of the discomfort, but also the need for careful and very delicate travel back or around that happens in Herkunft or in identity. It seems to me that Celan's response about the simultaneous arrival and return, about the road, is quite clear. This is, I quote Celan in English, "The landscape from which by what deters, but are there such things? Deters. The landscape from which I come to you might be unfamiliar to most of you. It is the landscape that was home to a not inconsiderable portion of those Hasidic tales that Martin Buber has retold for us all in German. It was, if I may add to this topographic sketch something that appears before my eyes, now from very far away. It was a region, Bukovina, it was a region in which human beings and books used to live." Deters, but in German Umwege. Auf welchen Umwegen? Aber gibt es das denn, Umwege? 2 years later, that was in Bremen, 2 years later, in a speech that thematizes the road in numerous places, Nesselweg, travel, or Toposforschung, Celan supplements the words from Bremen. I quote again Celan, then, in English, then does one, in thinking of poems, does one walk such paths with poems? Paths. This is Weg. Wege. Are these paths only by paths from do to do? This is Umwege. Sind diese Wege nur Umwege? Umwege von dir zu dir. Yet, at the same time, among how many other paths, there are also paths on which language gets a voice. They are encounters, paths of a voice to a perceiving do. Creaturely paths, sketches of existence perhaps, ascending oneself ahead toward oneself, in search of oneself. In search of oneself. Der Suche nach sich selbst. And then a kind of homecoming. Eine Art Heimkehr. And final, this famous phrase, I also seek, for I am back again where I began, the place of my own origin. Ich suche auch, denn ich bin ja wieder da, wo ich begonnen habe, den Ort meiner eigenen Herkunft. There are many translations, for example, one of Pierre Joris. Does one take, when thinking of poems, does one take such routes with the poems? Wege. Are these routes only reroutings, detours from you to you? Or the poem is the detour from you to you? It is the route. Das Gedicht ist der Umweg von dir zu dir. Es ist der Weg. Yeah. Probably, we ought to very carefully reconstruct these two protocols offered by Paul Celan as an endlessly poor and laborious answer to the question, Heimat und ich? Likely, this reconstruction would be successfully to the extent that each one of us individually answers this question that affects us all without blindly following all of Celan's various associations and obsessions about home and way home, as Celan's answer connects us too quickly with some other answers in the histories of wandering and discomfort. One of the main reasons I choose to speak about Celan, who explicitly mentions Bukovina as Heimat, or Bukovina as a highland. Imagine that this is the Bukovina where in 1930 there are 93,000 Jews officially counted, while on the 20 May of 42 there were 17,000. Okay, the main reason why I choose to speak about Celan's and Heimat refers sometimes to the unsatisfactory readings of Celan by Jacques Derrida. In Sovereignties in Question, for example, the Derrida is all too quickly and insufficiently justifiably reduces Celan's engagement to Freud's Unheimlich. I think that this is really no connections. It beggars belief that in the seminar, for example, Le Bête et le Souverain, where he interprets Heidegger's Umweg in detail, along with a philosophy essentially opposed to any Umweg, Derrida does not oppose this idea, Heidegger's Umweg, by the Umweg in Celan, or we can find in Benjamin Methode as Umweg. I think that this omission is all the greater when we know that in his last seminars Derrida often analyzes Celan's meridian. Celan's response is above all in resistance, we can say unconscious and certainly intuitive, to nostalgia, that is to Heidegger and his understanding of the path and the protocol revealed by the word Umweg. For Celan, there is first of all no house where we will be at home. When translating Emily Dickinson, he discovers the vindicating phrase, homeless at home. Homeless at home, when he translated her, primarily because the home is no more, or because the home has been abandoned forever. I am not at home even when it seems that I'm at home at mine. In one way or another, I cannot be a witness. One without a house or Heimat cannot testify. At the same time, I testify that I am not a witness, that I cannot be a witness, and as such I am a witness without testimony. This naked ich or I or me is never at home, never with itself, and never feels itself in a space that gives the sense of potential closeness. This is not a hidden nostalgia, nor the possibility of being at home anywhere. We can find this to being at home anywhere. This is, die Philosophie ist eigentlich heimlich, ein Trieb, überall zu Hause zu sein. This is completely different strategy, Heideggerian strategy or Novalis strategy, to being at home anywhere. And unfortunately, Celan did not know this Heidegger seminar. This is seminar, the Grundbegriffe der Metaphysik, published seminar from 29, but published in 83, where the Heidegger is analyzing this Novalis sentence, quote, das Heimat als die Grundstimmung des Philosophierens und der Fragen nach Weltähnlichkeit Vereinzelung. Completely different strategy, if you know, you see now, completely different strategy of identity and completely different strategy of this strategy of Jesus Christ to always be yourself, witness of yourself, or guarantor of yourself. That means this is not hidden nostalgia, nor possibility of being at home anywhere, nor does Celan invent some kind of authentic language of the native land. There is no authentic language of the native land, because he speaks of poetry that might help show the way, but not about language. That means poetry supposes translation and transcendence language and plurality of language. In other words, there is no trace in Celan of Humboldt's idea of inseparability of Sprache and Heimat. It seems to me that Humboldt's famous sentence, die wahre Heimat ist eigentlich die Sprache, or the true home, or true house, is really language, from his 1827 letter to Charlotte, with all its various incarnations and repetitions from Hannah Arendt to Derrida or Gadamer, could also be completed well in Heidegger's speech on the occasion of the 700th anniversary of the native city of Maaskirch. I quote Heidegger, unsere Sprache nennt den Zug zur Heimat das Heimweh. Completely different in Celan. Second fictional protocol Paul Celan offers as a response to the question of the position of ich or me in relation to Heimat, Heimat und ich. We find a collision between, as you remember in Bremen and in Darmstadt, collision between the arrival from somewhere in Bremen, arrival from somewhere, and in Darmstadt, return back. These two operations conducted simultaneously mean that there can never be direct movement or straight path or Weg, rather that the ich or me or I is always within the register of Umwege. If we remove or put aside those aspects most interesting to Celan and his readers from his speeches in Bremen and Darmstadt, that means the idea of Landschaft or Heimat, where books and people live together, as well the idea that one travels through poems back to the Magister region, where people and books comprise the Wir, then we are left with a double perspective that necessarily cancels this ever-wandering or pseudo-wandering Ich down myriad detours. As if Celan's Ich, and not only his, of course, does not move at all. That means this is some kind of illusion that this Ich is in move. And in Levinas' interpretation, Levinas formulates this situation very good as follows: la circularité de ce mouvement sans retour. Circulation, this move without back, without return. In the passage delivered by Celan in Bremen, he informs us that he has arrived from somewhere, that this country is a noun to us, and that he's arrived auf welchen Umwegen, detours. The question that remains is as follows, and he asked himself, aber gibt es das denn Umwege? Or in English, by what detours? But are there such things? What is this detours? Detours. In French also, détour. In the fragment, differently, contrary, in the fragment from Darmstadt, the direction or perspective is the opposite. Now we are dealing with eine Art Heimkehr. The return seems to be performed through poems, but through these detours, Umweg. Here too, Celan asks a similar question. Sind diese Wege nur Umwege von dir zu dir? Or then does one, in thinking of poems, does one walk such paths with poems? Are these paths only by paths from do to do? Once again, if we are able to hold at distance Celan's main assumption, of which he speaks in the passage on anti-biography toward the end of 53 or beginning of 54, that the Heimat of the poet is indeed the poem itself, a poem that always brings together I and du. This is echte Dichtung is antibiografisch. Problem with this, he said, echte Dichtung ist antibiografisch. Die Heimat des Dichters ist ein Gedicht. The problem is that true poetry is therefore not biographical. True poetry is not biographical, that is to say, for it to be poetry, there can be no testifying about oneself in it. In that case, if for poet, the poem itself is a Heimat, then the only thing that remains unchanged in Celan is his uncertainty regarding the existence of these detours, Umwege. Even though the Darmstadt speech, alternating between seeking and finding, ends in the discovery of the meridian, as you remember, it would appear that Paul Celan's only effort is to sustain and hold this question, or these questions about the paths that come from the abyss and lead to the abyss. I quote again Celan, the abyss is their Heimat, their language is being on the road. The abyss is their Heimat. On a course filled with the hesitation, always tardy, and never arriving. In the sentence that follows, at a moment Herkunft or Pays natal is reached, where everything is discovered and where everything is in place, the only thing for us and for him, that the only thing remaining is to further ask and always seek anew. I quote again, I also seek, for I am back again where I began, the place of my own origin. Thank you very much. Thank you.